Hi David, it's great to see you.
Thank you very much for having me, Rachel.
It's a pleasure. So David, today we're going to be talking about sustainability. We've obviously worked with you researching into your partners, looking at what they're doing, creating an ebook to help them to look at how they develop their sustainability strategies. The interviews we did highlighted that Schneider's clearly seen in the channel as a sustainable organisation. Partners recognise that you're, as an organisation, are doing a lot. Can you maybe explain a little bit as well as to how Schneider positions itself?
Yeah, Schneider started their journey maybe over 15 years ago on this topic, and it's a key topic within our business. We're lucky enough to be recognised by some global thinkers around this. The last one we achieved was platinum status for EcoVadis last year. So we're really proud around being recognised for our commitment to this. If you're looking at our commitments as a company, what we're looking to drive, we're aiming to be carbon neutral in our operations by 2025, moving forward to being net zero ready, and it's net zero ready, which is a reduction of 90% of our CO2 emissions across our operations by 2030, progressing to be net zero totally across all of our operations by 2050. So it's a big commitment for us. It's something we're very focused on doing. We would love to work with our partners around achieving their commitments as well.
And what actions are you taking then? You've identified that by 2025 that you'll be there. What are you looking for?
Again, from a whole business perspective, we're looking at, all of the scopes within our control. We're looking at, how we're taking product from our manufacturing plants, how it's flowing in through our sales teams and also going on to our customers, but also, how our businesses and our buildings and our people work in a more sustainable factor as well.
Great, thank you. So it's great to hear what Schneider's doing as its own organisation.
Yeah.
It'd be really interesting to know what you're doing for the partners. One of the key things that came out of the research we did in discussions with the partners is they know you are and recognise you as a sustainable company, but they don't really understand what you've got for them.
Yes.
They don't see that coming through from you.
Sustainability as a whole, really is around starting the conversation. So starting to, look at your own business, look at the partners you work with, and really starting to understand and measure where you are now and where you want to get to. One of the things we're working quite closely with our partners and our partners' customers is around audits and really giving them that point where they have that really clear start point where they can assess where they are now. And then we move into very much like a four-step strategy with them, where we then move on to, how do we support more measurement, which solutions, software, hardware, service we can deploy, and then finally, how do we monitor success and how do we monitor ongoing performance? But for us, it's starting the conversation. We have a range of audits that we've developed. We have a future ready audit that's an online, very, very simple to, and free of charge for our partners to use and for our partners to pass on to their customers. Gives them a really good idea of where they are on their journey. Progressing to more of a physical audit where we will work with partners, go into their facilities and, help them with that journey.
Okay, that's great. It's good to hear because I think the partners are struggling to know exactly how to get that support from you and work with you. So that's good to hear. The research also highlighted differences in partner size as well. Obviously, you alluded to the fact that different partners are at different stages of their journey in sustainability. Also noted in the research that in EMEA, 75% of partners have got some resource dedicated to sustainability, but a relatively small proportion of those have actually set their own objectives as to how they bring sustainability into their own organisation. And I think that really we see that highlighted by size of organisation and also where they are in the European market as well. There's clearly differences in terms of maturity across Europe, and I don't know whether you're seeing that.
Yeah, and I'd go as far as saying we're seeing different levels of maturity globally as well. Within Europe, it is true we're seeing certain countries move faster, and the difficult thing is we're seeing different countries focus on different elements. Around sustainability. From a partner engagement aspect, this is not a one partner, one customer type of conversation. The only way we're going to achieve our goals around sustainability is to bring in the wider ecosystem. If you look at a typical reseller, an IT reseller, 70% of their CO2 emissions is in scope 3, which is upstream, downstream of their own operations. You're only going to bring that to drive more efficiency by bringing the wider ecosystem in. And this is where manufacturers like ourselves, like Schneider Electric, are stepping up and helping partners. But IT distribution plays a role in this as well. We need to come together. But it starts for me very much with understanding where you are on your journey, what your expectations are, and that's really the conversational piece.
Yeah, absolutely. We see that very much, that the partners need to look at where they are,
yeah,
what do they want to achieve, which element of sustainability they want to focus on to start with. It's difficult, like you say, for them to measure scope 3. That's the hardest thing that they tell us as well.
Yes, and we see this in business drivers. For example, public sector tenders, we're seeing more and more public tenders come out with an element of ESG in there and as well. So it's important, to understand what your business is and how this impacts us.
Yeah, definitely. And like you say, different countries have different regulations as well, and the partners, particularly those who cross borders, have to really focus on those regulations in countries. So there's different ones. The Netherlands, for example, is on circular. France has some in circular too, but clearly different partners will have different priorities when it comes to carbon, measuring carbon for both their customers and themselves. How can you support those partners in that discussion?
Yeah, again, there is not a one view for everyone. It really depends on, again, like I mentioned before, where they are with their journey, the size of their operations. For the IT world, where they have logistics as part of their offers. Really, what we would say is, the best practice is to look at yourselves first to see where you can drive efficiencies into your own business. So for example, what are you doing with your sales teams? Are they moving across to electric? How are you operating your buildings? And Schneider Electric can help with this. We have a lot of experience in doing this within our own buildings. A lot of our infrastructure and our gains have come from our estates. And it starts with the engagement, but again, the ready assessments, the audits that we can engage with is really a good start point.
Absolutely, for that. Yeah, and we also see that for the partners in our sort of broader research, there's a huge opportunity in developing some of these services. We're not saying there's probably 150 services partners could choose to develop and deliver, but it's how do you enable those to pick the right ones? How do you bring those partners on to choose the right services for their organisation?
The opportunity around sustainability is huge for our partners. You can't talk around sustainability and not talk around digitisation. Okay. And digitisation has been a key driver within our business, within the channels business. You just have to look back at the pandemic and saw the exponential growth around data. And there's lots of opportunities around consultative services for partners, the developing the solutions and the managed services that go with this topic, as well as the kind of life cycle management as well. So there's huge amount of opportunity for our partners. And we're seeing a lot of our partners change their business models. It was interesting when we were talking about talent. Talent in this field, being able to work and consult with partners on these types of topics is going to be key in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you brought up the point of the ecosystem and that partners can't do this alone. And I think that's absolutely, we see that. We see that outside of what we're talking about today, in that distributors and resellers, channel partners are coming together to talk together about how they can learn from each other and best practice together. Look at how we can support the industry move to be more sustainable. And I think you're absolutely right what you're saying, that there's we're absolutely seeing that as well. Best
practice sharing is key in this topic. Not one person has a very broad skill set here. It's bringing in infrastructure partners, your estate management in there, all of those people together and really deploying kind of strategy for you based on what you're looking to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we talk about the data centre, there's an awful lot there that's going on. A lot of, the partners are talking to us and have talked to us through the process of this research as well about, what they're doing in the data centre, monitoring efficiency, looking at how they can improve that, the move to renewables as well, and clearly thinking about the energy side of things. Clearly in Europe, with the energy crisis as we have at the moment, that's a key focus for a lot of the partners too.
Yeah, and within the data center area, this is pretty mature topic. Our data center partners have been talking to us for a number of years around this. 80% of CO2 emissions comes from energy. If you look at the technology that's available, you can see a reduction in 70% of CO2 emissions. In that, I think as well as if you look outside of the data center, what we're going to see around the explosion around edge, and we are seeing, when you start to see more smart cities, smart factories, smart roads come online, the opportunity, becomes huge around this, and this is why this is such a key topic. The understanding, how you position this, how you position your company in this topic, is going to be key for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things we find when we're talking to the partners is they're looking at where they fit. They know they're not going to fit, of course, everything, but they're looking at where their organisation fits. And really, I'm thinking about what one thing would you recommend to a partner, depending on where they are in their sustainability journey, maybe at the beginning, maybe at the middle. What would you recommend would be the sort of one thing that you would say to them to?
We mentioned it earlier. I would say, reach out, start the conversation. For me, everyone is on a different path and everyone is at a different stage of this. Surround yourself with partners that want to support you on this topic and also are passionate around this as well. That would be the key area I look at. The key point for me is not one person, not one company is going to be able to solve this. It's a huge challenge, as we know, as we move forward. But reaching out, starting the conversation, gaining as much information as you can would be the point. And this is where our assessments and our audits that come in are a really great point, not only to support their businesses, but also their customers as well.
Yeah, and what would you also recommend to a partner who's looking at bringing sustainable resource into their organisation? Sustainability expertise is obviously a key thing. We see if you do a LinkedIn search, you find 120,000 open headcount for sustainability positions.
Yeah.
We've got a skills challenge as well, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a key kind of battleground to get talent. We were talking about the broader kind of IT challenge around talent as well. I would say that there is a lot of online training, so potentially taking people and repurposing them. We have a huge amount of people in Schneider. We're spending a lot of time on coaching people and changing their knowledge on these types of topics. I would say that making your business attractive. When I interview a lot of new people coming into the industry, sustainability is they want to work for a company that is passionate around this topic. So the way you position yourself from a recruitment perspective would be key into making sure you get the top talent.
So David, final question, just thinking about you personally and what you're doing as an individual to be more sustainable. What can you tell us that you're doing in your personal life?
Yeah, so I have a 12-year-old daughter, so she's very passionate around these type of topics. Simple things in the home, like not focusing on making sure we're not using single-use plastics, recycling. I live in the UK, we haven't turned the heating on yet, and clearly we will keep that off as much as possible. But looking at it within the home, making sure moving to more kind of smart lighting. Even looking at things like heat pumps and solar panels. It's not easy, and I would say again, the challenge that we see at home is the same challenge we see in the business. But for me, again, it's kind of increasing your education around this and just really exploring options as well.
No, thank you. I fully agree. It's about looking at everything you do and looking at how you can be more sustainable, I think. So, great. Well, it's been great talking today.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And
yeah,
thank you.